Welcome to the Children's Book Author Podcast. I'm your host, Eleanor Page. If you write for children, or it's always been your dream to, you're in the right place. As the children's book author, I'm on a quest to discover everything there is about writing, publishing, and marketing children's books, as well as how to supercharge my creativity, skyrocket my productivity, and absolutely everything else there is to know about how to be the best, so you can be too. Join me as I interview fabulous guests and become the children's book author. Welcome back to the Children's Book Author Podcast with me, Eleanor Page. Today is episode 3 with illustrator and graphic designer Ffion Evans. Now you're wondering, Ffion is not a children's book author, but she is indeed a wonderful creative, and she's really dedicated to helping creatives overcome their limiting belief systems and get into a regular creative practice. And one of my favorite things that she says, which really changed my mindset substantially as a children's book author, is that you don't wait to get motivated and then sit down to do your creative practice. You actually sit down to do your creative practice, and then voila, you are suddenly feeling amazingly motivated. Now, this kind of makes a lot of sense because I rarely wake up and feel so motivated to get exercising. Well, maybe you do, but I don't. I did when I was younger, but not so much as I'm getting older. But once I get started doing it, I feel so good. I'm like, why do I not do this more often? And creativity is the same, especially given we have a lot of inner resistance. I don't know if you've ever read the book, The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. It's so good, and it really talks about all the different forms of resistance and how to really overcome and break through creative barriers. And Ffion was amazing talking on this topic. I know you'll gain immense value from listening to this podcast, and it will definitely inspire you to commit to a much better, regular, healthier, mentally and emotionally healthier creative practice. So for you, that might be writing, yes, but it could also be publishing, it could be marketing, it could be school visits. All these things form part of your creative practice, and it's a lot of things to juggle. For me, I'm also learning how to illustrate one day, hopefully, who knows, illustrate my own children's books, and that might be the case for you. I know there's a lot of children's book writers who would love to one day illustrate their own books or illustrate for other people's books as well. And I think you'll also gain a lot in that respect from this interview. So let's dive in. No more chatting from me. Jump in right now, listen to this interview. Go ahead and give me a rating on wherever you listen to this podcast and enjoy today's show. Welcome back to the show. I'm super excited to have a special guest with me today, Ffion Evans, who is a freelance graphics designer, artist and illustrator based in Germany. Don't you just love the internet? Amazing. And normally I would not read the person's bio out. I would let them introduce themselves. But this time I'm making an exception because Ffion, as well as being all those amazing other talents I mentioned, which are very visual, is a fabulous writer. And when I read her bio, I said, I have to actually read that to you, even though it's going to look rude that I'm reading. So here it goes. Ffion Evans is a freelance graphics designer, artist and illustrator based in Germany. After a many-year creative slump, she joined the Making Art Everyday Challenge in January 2019 and has been drawing every single day since, developing her quirky, fun, and colourful art style. She loves sharing lessons learned, thoughts about the creative process, and words of encouragement for fellow creatives on her Instagram and blog. She has made it her mission to demystify and de-romanticize the creative process and be super honest about what actually goes into building and sustaining a regular creative practice, as well as the ups and downs that come with it. Ffion, welcome to the Creative Genius at Play podcast.
Thank you, Eleanor. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
You are like the perfect guest in the sense that the tagline of the show is discover your creative confidence, innovate in style, and make art that matters. And I feel like you are the epitome of those three things. So much. So let's start exploring. Tell me a bit about your journey as a creative and how you got to the point of what that bio says, which is amazing. Tell me a bit about it.
It's been quite a long journey. So I started drawing. I've been drawing basically, I think, as long as I can remember. I started drawing really early as a child. I used to draw a lot as a child. I used to draw during school lessons, much to the dismay of my teachers. They used to take away my pencils and paper, and I would wait 5 minutes and then bring up the backup stash from like my bag. So that didn't make them very happy, but I improved my drawing a lot at school. I don't really have any formal art education. I had art lessons at school, which were mostly rubbish, except for one really wonderful teacher right at the end. And after school, I went, one thing that really improved my drawing was actually my Pokemon phase, which was like my absolute obsession when I was a teenager. So I drew and invented like loads of my own Pokemon, and I was just drawing like basically all the time. Before that, it was like dragons and unicorns and wild animals. And then after school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I ended up going in for communications design because it felt like the sort of societally more acceptable version of art. I actually applied to art school and I was rejected for not having any particular talent. So you can do a lot, even if people think you can't. So I studied communications design. I went freelance directly after studying, built my own graphics and web design business, working for online entrepreneurs. And then in recent years, I also sort of slipped into doing some illustration work on the side. And I really, really love doing that. And I actually got hired by one company to do loads and loads of monster illustrations for their book. And that was just such a fantastic project. And I'm still working for them, and I really, really enjoy doing that. So I've been sort of leaning a bit more into this sort of illustration side. But then I've also had a really, really long spell where I just was really, really disconnected from my creativity. And I was really struggling. It had lots of different reasons. It was partly stress and mental health related after school. It was, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was worried about money. I went through a bad relationship. After studying, I went through the stress of building my own business, where I basically just didn't know what I was doing and was trying to learn like my job and how to build a business all at the same time. And I think I was in this like constant stress cycle, which really, really wreaked havoc on my mental health, and also really disconnected me from my creativity. And I went through phases where it would be a bit better and I'd sort of get back into it. And then I have phases where I'd want to draw, but I just felt like I couldn't, and I wasn't coming up with ideas, and it was so painful to, on the one hand, really, really want it, and then every time I sat down, I would just hate everything I created, and it was awful. And yeah, parts of this disconnection were definitely sort of mental health related, and but also I think a lot of it was that I had these faulty misconceptions about what creativity should look like, and I kept seeing a lot of things in my creative practice that I was taking as indicators that something was wrong with me, with my creativity. Maybe also like this element of like a bit of sort of artist drama of like, oh, I have no talent and this is awful and I will never be a great artist. But I had all these sort of preconceptions about what creativity should look like, and my creativity rarely felt that way, so I thought something was wrong and something was broken. And then in 2019, I went traveling for a year with my boyfriend through Southeast Asia, which was an absolutely incredible experience. And I joined the Making Art Everyday Challenge by Lisa Bado. Shout out to Lisa, she's an absolutely wonderful person. You should probably have her on your podcast.
Oh my God, I would die to have her on my podcast, but I haven't been brave to ask her yet. So if you're watching this, Lisa, please come on.
But she's a lovely person. She's an amazing creative. She is so encouraging. And she's just created this challenge for people who want to draw, anyone, either people who want to deepen their creative practice or just people who want to learn to draw. And it's sort of focused about on drawing on the iPad in a software called Procreate. And it all just sort of clicked together for me somehow because I had the iPad with me, and I didn't want to lug like a load of art supplies across Southeast Asia for a year, so I didn't really take much stuff with me. But I really got into the digital drawing through this challenge, and I started off sort of non-committal, really. It was just like I saw this challenge and I thought, oh, that sounds cool, but I'm not sure if I can commit to that. And then on the day it started, I was like, well, maybe I'll just draw for 10 minutes today and see how it goes. And then I drew for 10 minutes again the next day. And then I decided to commit to it. And I started really, really small. Like I say, just like a few minutes a day was sort of my minimum commitment. And it just really took off from there. And I learned, just like everything shifted for me. And I learned so much about my creative process, and so much got put into perspective for me just through showing up every single day and drawing, whether I felt like it, whether I didn't feel like it, whether I was on top of a mountain somewhere in Myanmar or like sitting in a plane or on a bus. And I learned so much, and I really started unraveling a lot of the beliefs that I had about what I thought creativity was supposed to look like and what it actually looked like for me day to day. And I just realized like how many strange ideas we have about creativity and how that really holds people back. And then I started sharing this stuff on Instagram because I thought that, like, this is interesting to me and this is sort of what's going through my head. And I would post my pictures and I would sort of add my thoughts to it. And I got so many people coming to me and saying like, oh my God, like me too, this is how I feel. And I thought I was broken and I thought there's something wrong with my creativity. And what, you mean it's not always fun and it's not always easy? And that just really grew into a really beautiful community of other creatives. And I just realized that, like, I feel like the journey has actually become bigger than the art itself for me. Like, I really enjoy doing the art, but I'm so much more obsessed at the moment with the actual process of showing up daily and making the art than the actual results. And at the same time, my art has improved so much over the last 2 years and 2 months that it's been absolutely unbelievable to me. And so I've sort of made it my little mission to sort of dispel all these creative myths and to encourage other creatives. And yeah, just to sort of de-romanticize like the creative process. Yeah, and basically that's where I'm at now.
Well, there's so many valuable things in there, and going back to what you started off saying about how you felt like your crisis in life derailed you, and you allowed yourself to not engage in creativity anymore. So when you started doing the Making Art Every Day challenge, how was that? Like, in terms of, like you said, you turned up no matter what. And did you find that actually helped your mental health, just in fact by turning up?
Yes, I definitely think that it was. I have to say, I did have to do some work. I think it was like approaching it from both ends. I had to do some work to sort of unravel some sort of physical and mental health issues. But I also think that my mental health definitely improved a lot from sort of basically healing that part of me, because it was really, there was this sort of deep disconnection, and it was incredibly painful to be so disconnected from something that I knew that deep down I absolutely loved, and I needed it. And it was like, I couldn't not draw, but at the same time when I was showing up to draw, I hated it all. And this challenge has like really, it's healed that part of me, I feel. And it's just, it's reconnected me to my creativity. It's taken out all the drama. And I've actually found that the practice has been incredibly grounding over the last 2 years. I went through some sort of personal tragedies. In 2019, I lost both my grandmothers. And so it wasn't like a great year for our family. And then 2020, we all know what that looked like. So and after the first year was really hard, and there was a lot of sort of extreme ups and downs, and I had some months where it was just like really, really not working for me, but I still kept going, and I would come out the other side, and each time I came out the other side, it would just sort of, I don't know, that did something for me, that it was just, if I keep showing up, at some stage it shifts and it changes, and this disconnect isn't there forever. And sometimes there are phases where I'm not absolutely in love with it, and it doesn't feel great, and I'm not super excited about the stuff that I'm creating. But then on the other hand, like some days I feel like absolute shit, and then I show up and I create something that I really, really love, and I just don't know beforehand what that's going to be. And in 2020, it was just a lot easier somehow. I felt even less drama. I was much more comfortable with like the ups and downs, and I knew that they were natural, and I knew that they were nothing to worry about. And I think that's been one of the biggest insights for me, is just like so much of what we think is like, oh, I have artist block, I have creative block, my creativity is gone forever. It's like, oh, it's not. It's just like, it's a phase. You have good days, you have bad days. There's like a few extremely good days, a few extremely bad days. Most of the days are somewhere in the middle of that. And it's all completely normal, and it's nothing to worry about, and your creativity is not gone because you had like a month of bad days.
Yeah, that's so reassuring to me, because I'm like a really, really, really beginner, particularly in art, and but even in my writing journey. So I've probably been writing about, I say 4 years because last year didn't count. So 4 years. I've just like completely wiped out 2020.
Just forget 2020 even existed. Let's not talk about that.
And but still, so many psychological barriers. And my background, you may not know, is as a psychologist in counselling. So now I should be on top of this, but then I go to create. And I think it's exactly the opposite. I'm like, oh, I've got mental issues, I can't create. So talk to me a little bit, because I know this is one of your blog posts and one of your favourite topics, the topic of motivation versus inspiration, like the sitting down when you feel inspired, when the birds are singing and I feel connected to the muse, and now I sit down to write or draw or knit or do whatever, garden, everything creative. And if it's not there, then I can't do it.
If I only showed up to draw when I was inspired, I would practically never draw. That is like the absolute truth. And that's what I see a lot with other artists who follow me on Instagram, particularly like newer artists or younger artists. And what I've definitely seen in myself is I felt that I had to be inspired to sit down to draw. And it's a question that comes up again and again. Is like, how do you find inspiration? How do you find motivation? And it's also a big worry for a lot of artists. Is like, I just don't feel inspired. Like, I don't know what to do. And my experience has been is that we've got it completely backwards, and we expect us to need inspiration or motivation to show up. But actually those things come as a result of the showing up. Like, the more I show up and the more I sort of build up this streak of like, I've drawn for like literally hundreds of days in a row, that is motivating to me. And every time I push through a bad day and I'm like, I feel awful, I don't want to draw today, but I'm going to sit down and do it because it's a habit and basically I just can't not do it anymore. And then at the end of it, I've made something, and some days it's not that great, and some days it's absolutely fantastic. And it just, that is what builds the motivation for me, is that sort of small moment of pride of, I showed up even though I maybe didn't want to, and I made something. And that is, there's just so many like breakthroughs I have where I really have terrible days and I show up to draw anyway, and I create something that I actually really love. And I've just come to the realization that how I feel on any given day just doesn't predict the outcome of the work that I can create. And the only way that I can know what I can create on that day is if I actually show up and try. And some days it might not really work out, but then at least I know and I tried. And just having that experience of, I did it anyway, I showed up, I made something, even though my inner critic was like shouting me down and telling me like, this is all crap, this is all rubbish. At the end of it, I'd still made something, and that gives me the motivation to keep going the next day. And when I have days where I create something that I do actually love, and sometimes I have like these extreme jumps where I feel like I don't even know how I drew this because I didn't know that was in me. And that is where my inspiration comes from. That is the source of motivation and inspiration for me. I don't wait for the inspiration to show up and then I sit down to draw. I get the inspiration from actually showing up and doing the work and seeing the results that I get from it.
Oh, there were two like golden things you said. Actually, the whole thing was golden, but there were two especially golden things there that made me go, oh my gosh, I've got to write that down and like pin that on my pin board forever or glue it on my computer or something. But the first one was about that, how I feel. Now I'm going to butcher what you just said, but you take it from me and make it right again, right? So how I feel doesn't have to determine what I produce that day. Like that's a golden moment. How I feel doesn't. And the second one, before I forget, is that the motivation and inspiration starts to come from inside of you. I'm paraphrasing you completely. Rather than outside of you, the more that you do it. Oh, yeah. Like that's it. I reckon they're your two book titles, Ffion. There's books in this, and you've got to write them. That's
2022 here. What's next? Yeah, exactly. That's one. I think one of the biggest lessons actually that I've taken away from it all is, like you say, or like I say, that how I feel when I show up to draw is a very, very unreliable predictor of what I can create on that day. And I've created absolutely fantastic stuff on days where I thought, like, I had a headache, I felt awful, I was exhausted, I really just didn't want to draw. And the only reason I showed up was because it was a habit, and it was just some part of me is like, it's time to draw now, you have to do it. And then I try and be really gentle with myself. It's like, okay, you could draw for 10 minutes, and if it's shit, then you can stop, but show up and try. And sometimes then I just get so into it, and at the end I create something like absolutely fantastic, and I'm like, I don't even know where that came from, but that is amazing. And then I've had days where I've shown up and I've been so motivated, and I've felt so good, I've felt so happy, I'm so full of energy, and I feel inspired, and I just create absolute rubbish. And I've just come to...
That's me today. Like, I was on fire today. You know, after a short 5-day lockdown in Australia, the kids and the husband vanished out of the house, and I was like, oh. And then I sat down and I went, la, 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 la. You know, I still did some because, you know, I did, but not anything like I thought I would achieve, which is crazy. They don't match up, do they? Like,
it really don't match up, yeah. And I've just come to accept that over time as just being normal, and and that not being a cause for worry, and also not making bad days a reason to not show up, because I could create something absolutely amazing.
Yes.
And I would be very sad if I didn't, just because I decided, well, it's a bad day, so I'm not going to do it today.
Let's talk a bit about the inner critic, because you did touch upon it earlier, and I know you've got a lot to say about that. What do we do with the inner critic? Do we, like, jail it away until after? Do we learn to tame it? Do we ignore? What do we do? Is there a mute button?
Oh, that would be so nice. I would
pay
a lot for a mute button for my inner critic.
On day 365 of making art every day, does the critic magically vanish?
No. And
Darn it.
I don't know that the inner critic ever completely vanishes. And I think what we also need to be aware of is, like, the inner critic is not necessarily like an evil thing. It's essentially it's just a part of us that is trying to keep us safe from what it perceives to be something dangerous. And creativity just sort of inherently deals with a lot of unknowns. And, like, I mean, the best example of that is, like, the fear of the blank page. Like, every artist I know has sort of some element of this sort of inherent terror of just sort of sitting in front of a white piece of paper and being like, I have to create something out of nothing. And that is really, really hard. For one thing, it's hard to just create something out of nothing. And for another thing, I think our brains are just sort of primitively wired to just dislike things that are unknown. And in the unknown, there are tigers. And it just sort of can't properly distinguish that it's just a white piece of paper. There's actually no tiger. But it just, like, it is something that is unknown. It is unfamiliar. And also, drawing is hard, and writing is hard.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, it is. It's a skill that you can learn, that you can practice, but a lot of the time it's hard. And it's hard because you're always pushing yourself to improve, you're always pushing yourself to grow, you're always learning new stuff. And I'm going to speak to drawing because that's what I do, but drawing is so insanely complex when you think about it. And you're dealing with volume, shape, light, shadow, storytelling, anatomy. There are just so many moving parts to drawing, and mastering those elements is a lifetime of work, and you're never done. Like, you're not going to get to the end of your life and be like, I understand everything now. And this is all hard, and that is sometimes painful to sit with and to go through. And our brain just is like, oh, this hurts. Like, I don't want to do this. So it pulls out all the stops to make you stop doing whatever you were doing and do something that is more sort of immediately satisfying, like watch Netflix or read a good book or drink your hot chockey. So it's in a sort of twisted way. It's actually trying to keep you safe from discomfort and keep you sort of in a comfort zone, in a sort of energy saving mode, and like, I don't want to work so hard, so I'm going to try and make you stop. And if I have to sort of play on all your horrible little artist insecurities, I'm going to do that. But essentially, it's like, it is trying to keep you safe in a very twisted way. I don't think that the inner critic maybe ever really goes away, but my experience has been that it has gotten a lot quieter, and I've just gotten a lot better at dealing with it. And I think what am I trying to say? That it doesn't actually go away, but you get better at managing it, in a sense. And I don't think that you can, like you say, like mute it or completely sort of lock it away. I think that doesn't work. And I think trying to ignore it in that sense can actually make it worse in a way. So for me, it's mostly been a matter of sort of acknowledging what it's saying, and just sort of actually becoming aware of, like, what are you actually saying to yourself? Like, what are those words that are going through your head when you sit down to draw, and are they actually helpful? And are they, like, would you speak to a friend like that? Like, stop being horrible to yourself. And so I think, for one thing, becoming aware of these thoughts, maybe even if that's something that is helpful to you, like, you can journal on them, just sort of put them down on paper, because I feel that often makes it less scary, and also sort of helps be like, okay, wow, this shouldn't be in my head. And then not, I mean, in a sense, ignoring it, but sort of acknowledging that it's there, sort of being like, okay, I sort of get that it's sort of trying to keep me safe. This is actually not me. This isn't really not my, like, deepest belief of who I am, and this is not who I am. This is not how I want to speak to me. This is sort of coming from somewhere else. And then just be like, okay, I hear you, and now I'm going to sit down, I'm going to draw anyway.
Yeah.
And I tend to find that once I get into the process, like after, I don't know, quarter of an hour or something, that voice tends to disappear. And that doesn't mean it doesn't come back. And there's often phases within a drawing where when it starts getting more difficult, when I'm bumping up against something that maybe I'm not comfortable with, when I'm trying to figure out something new, it comes back. But for me, the best way to deal with it has just been to sort of acknowledge it, and then to keep doing basically the opposite of what it says. It's like, I hear you, and I'm still going to draw. And I think as well, what is really powerful about daily creating is that it becomes a habit. And when it becomes a habit, and you have, for example, if you have like a fixed time that you sit down to draw, for me it tends to be in the evening before I go to bed, your brain just sort of goes into that mode of creation by default, simply because it knows now is the time that I need to bring up this particular skill. And that sort of gives the inner critic like less time to get the guns out and be like, okay, I'm going to stop you. And I feel that the actual habit just, I just sort of click into creative mode. It's like, okay, it's time to draw. I mean, not that it's not easy, not that it's easy, or not that I don't procrastinate on it sometimes as well, but it's just, I sit down to draw because it feels right at that time, and it doesn't give the inner critic like enough time to get all worked up and bring out all the big ideas. And I feel over time it's gotten less and less and less, and quieter and quieter. And there are definitely phases where it's difficult, and particularly if I'm having a bad phase, sometimes that can go on for days, sometimes that can go on for weeks. I've even had like complete months where I'm like, I've still made stuff that I like, but the whole process has not felt good. And those tend to be times where the inner critic gets louder again. But again, when you show up every single day, it puts a lot of things into perspective, and you start to see that these ups and downs are natural, and you start to worry less about them, and you start to give them less meaning. Because before it was like, I'd sit down to draw, and I'd be so out of practice, and I'd be trying to like I have this idea of what I would draw, and I'd start drawing, and it would be awful because I was completely out of practice and I didn't really know what I was doing anymore, and I would hate it, and I would sort of take that to mean, oh, well, then I guess my creativity is just gone and it's never coming back. And it's like, yeah, okay, but maybe you need to practice for a month before you're sort of back in it. And those days just don't really happen for me so much anymore, because if I have a bad day, it's just a bad day, and I don't let it have any more meaning than that, if that makes sense. And in the long run, I just feel that this perspective of knowing your natural ups and downs in the creative process and knowing that your creativity comes back just really, really helps to not give so much meaning again to the voice of the inner critic, because you're like, yeah, you're just bullshitting me, basically. I know that you're lying now. Whereas before I would take that as truth, and it would be like, you're terrible, and you have no talent, and you are useless. And
I love that you said to acknowledge it, to actually, that's so powerful, to actually don't try to kill it like I often try to kill it. I must confess. I do. I
would kill it if I could. That doesn't seem to work.
It's the Greek in me, like it just like wants to kill it off. The dramatic Greek sort of in me does that, but it doesn't work.
That little dramatic artist inside of us. I have no talent. My creativity is gone.
That's right. And then I'll show everybody in the family and be like, see, do you see how good it is? And they're all like, no, I think it's good. And then I go, you're lying because you're my family. This is the sort
You're just saying that because you're my mother.
But as you're talking the whole time, what keeps popping into my head is like someone who exercises, right? Like it's so similar in so many ways, like in the sense that you might have days where you don't feel so energetic or you're feeling a bit run down, but you turn up anyway. And sometimes they're your most energetic days, and other days you're really pumped and you're a bit weaker than you thought when you were pumping the iron. And this happens, but it's almost like you're allowed to do that when it comes to exercise. But somehow creatives have this notion, and it's a couple of myths that you talk about that artists do. And the first one, let me see. Oh, yes, the one is that you're always inspired and never works a day in their life because it's such a joy to be an artist, so we're not really working. And the other is that you have to starve and not make money if you're an artist. So talk a bit about those two.
Yeah, that's just something that I've noticed over time, is that we have these two extreme ideas of art and art making and artists, and they don't go together, and neither of them is helpful, and neither of them is like 100% reality. And like you say, either we have, like from society, we have imposed all these ideas of artists don't make money, the starving artist, the tormented artist. I mean, like, the artists that go cutting off their ears is a popular one.
Don't do that, people. Do not cut off anybody.
Don't do that.
No.
Don't do that. Or like that you have to be completely like a complete emotional wreck to sort of reach any sort of emotional depth in your work, or artists who are drunk and on drugs because that's the only way that they can access their creativity. So on the one hand, you have like this completely sort of broken artist person stereotype, which puts a lot of people off pursuing art as a career because they believe that they can't make money, or that they have to be like completely destroy themselves in the process. And then on the other hand, when we approach the process of art making and people start trying to get into a creative practice, they expect it to be really easy. And
yes, and romantic. I expect it to be very romantic, like almost like, I just put my pen down and these things just flowed, and it was beautiful.
Kissed by the muse, and
all into the house, feeling like I'm just wonderful, all that.
And there's this overemphasis, I think, as well on talent. And I do believe that talent is an element of it, that there are some people who are just naturally very, very gifted in certain areas, and it is easier for them to get into a certain skill. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's easy.
True.
And I just see so many new artists, and they'll draw like 3 pictures and they'd be like, these all suck. I have no talent. I might as well not bother. And they throw it all away. And I think if you were like a plumber in training and your master's like, okay, here, fix this pipe, and you give it a go and you're like, you have no idea what you're doing, so you actually don't fix the pipe. You're not going to throw your wrench at the wall and be like, I have no talent for plumbing. Like, why should I? I might as well not bother. I'm never going to be a plumber. But we do that in the arts all the time. Like, I see that with artists all the time. Like, you draw a few pictures and you decide you're not good at it. And as I said earlier on, drawing is so insanely complex. There's no way that you're going to sit down and make your first drawing and it's going to be good. It's just not going to happen. And it's not going to be good after you've done 50 drawings. It might be a bit better, and after 100 drawings, maybe you're going to start to get a hang of some things. And it's such an extremely long process to get good at. And in a lot of other skills, we would just accept that is the case, that we need to practice and we need to be taught, and we need to learn these skills, and we need to train them. And in art, there's just this idea that you either have the talent or you don't. And I don't believe that that's true. I do believe that there's an element of talent that might make it a little bit easier for you, but I believe that anyone who has a genuine interest in learning to draw could learn to draw if they really wanted to. It's a matter of the time that you put in. And I think that this sort of, like you say, the romantic version of the artist who is just like flowing, like going with, like, I am so inspired and motivated and I am kissed by the muse and creativity comes so easy to me that it's always fun and it's always easy. And that is literally like never what my creative practice has ever looked like, ever. And it's just, we have these 2 extreme ideas and neither of them seems to be serving them, and neither of them, in my experience, has much to do with reality. So,
well, like you said, you were drawing from when you were quite young, so that interest was there, and then you didn't get into, like you said, art school. Now, at that moment, you could have just completely gone, I'm going to go become a plumber.
I have no talent.
Yeah, you didn't become a plumber. You still stuck with creative things. Like that. Being a plumber can be very creative, people. So just keep that in mind.
Absolutely. This is in no way criticizing of plumbing. I'm just sort of trying to say, like, we wouldn't do this for any other skill.
Yeah.
But for some reason, we have this sort of dramatic artist element to it. I don't know what that is. Where did that come from?
Yeah, maybe because, you know, we almost like hunt for people that we find very talented, and we don't see necessarily the work. Like, you know, when I found you online, my first reaction wasn't, wow, Fion's been doing this for a long time. I went, wow, she's got talent. I need to go. And then I started reading and went, okay, oh, really? Oh, I would never have thought, you know, afterwards.
Yeah.
So, you know, we don't see sometimes that grit and that hard work that goes on behind the scene. You know, we often see on social media the beautiful side of you know, like for me, for example, last year was a terrible year because I was homeschooling and doing, you know, and just very disconnected from my own creativity, a bit like what you were saying. And I wasn't on social media. So when I turned back up, it's like everybody forgot that I wasn't there. They've all gone, oh, you're so creative. You were born that way. And then I have to say, I didn't create anything last year. And they're like, really? No, I'm sure you did. So they, again, I think other people romanticize and have some sort of false perception about what they're seeing. You know, when that book comes out, they think the author just sort of wrote it like very easily.
Yeah.
Or that thing just made itself very, like, especially when you watch the time lapses. When I watch your time lapses, I have this weird thing in my head that goes, I could so do that. And and I'm like, well, it looked so simple when she did it, It was just a few lines and a bit of shading, and then I go to do it and it doesn't work out like that, because I don't see those how many days that you've put in prior and those building blocks, it's that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Because actually I had a question the other day. Somebody asked me something along the lines of, they said something like, you're so talented, and have you always been able to draw? Because I'm starting to draw and I'm finding it really hard. And I was like, no, I haven't always been able to draw. I started very early. But I mean, those were kid drawings. They were rubbish. I mean, they were sweet because they were kid drawings, but I started with lines and squiggles and dots all over the place, and probably some on the walls. But again, it's sort of coming back to this element of either you're talented or you're not. And if you're talented, you sneeze out a drawing within a few seconds, and that's just not how it works. And I think, like you say, you see the end result, like on social media and things. You see the shiny sort of finished piece, but in many cases, the artists don't talk about the shit phase they had in the middle of the piece where it just didn't work out. And I don't really necessarily want to criticize that, because we don't do it for other things as well. But I think that's one place where it gives people a false idea of how easy it is to make art. And like I say, a lot of the time I struggle through a piece. There's usually a phase, at least somewhere in the middle, where I'm just like, this is not working, this looks awful, and I just have to keep going through that to the other side. And then at some stage it clicks again, and I'm like, oh no, now it's starting to come together. And that's just a normal part of creating many pieces. But it's not something that you see at the end. And even in the time lapse, you don't really see that struggle, because a lot of it is in my head. And sometimes some time lapses, it's quite funny. Like, you might see, I'm trying to draw the second hand or something, and I just keep erasing it and redrawing it and erasing it and redrawing it and erasing it and redrawing it. And then in the middle there'll be the sort of mad squiggle of rage where I'm like, this off. Which is why digital art is fabulous for having an undo button, because you can just do that as often as you like without ruining it. But the tendency is, even in a time lapse that is so sped up that it looks streamlined and it looks easy and it looks deliberate. And even that, I mean, I share the time lapse because I feel like you do see some of the messiness that goes into it, and it starts with sort of blobs of color that I'm just throwing around and sort of trying to make something that sort of is vaguely satisfying to me before I sort of dive in all the way. But even the time lapses, in a sense, give you a skewed perspective, because it didn't take me a minute to draw that piece. It took me, I don't know, 2 hours or an hour and a half or something at least. And the time lapse is a minute long, so it did not go that fast. And there was phases in between probably where I was sort of Googling something because I was procrastinating, or I was looking for new inspiration on Pinterest. And even there's just sort of mental work that goes in up front of looking at reference, and then trying to sort of come up with a concept or some sort of basic idea. You don't see any of that. You see the final result. And the same with the book. You get the book and you're like, yeah, the author just sort of sneezed this out. And
and often
it's not. I haven't written a book, but I'm pretty sure that's not how it works.
Well, in the indie world, which is the independent publishing world, is there's a saying that it takes about 10 books before you write a good one. Right, but then we look at traditional publishing, realistic. And in traditional publishing, they've debut author, and their book's amazing. Yeah. And you don't see that behind. It's very few authors. Some of them do say that I had I had 25 rounds of editing with the editor to get it to where you're reading it now. The debut author had 25 rounds of editing, right? And the self-published
help.
Yeah, right. So, and some of them have ghost writers, which is even, you couldn't have a ghost illustrator. Unfortunately, you can't do that, but you can.
No, tricky.
You can have a ghost writer, which is interesting, and still put your name on the cover. Let's talk a little bit about how you discovered your style. Yeah, because I know that a lot of artists, that's one of the top burning questions, like how do I discover my style?
How do I find my style?
And how is that style, become to a professional level versus now, what sort of is unprofessional? Maybe you could even talk a bit about that. Talk to me about your journey around that.
For one thing, professional level, basically, if you can get paid for it,
you're right.
You're doing it professionally, so I don't know.
I could work with that description, with that definition.
Sorry.
It reminds me, just as you're thinking of that, when years ago I decided to paint trees. And it was just a bit of fun. I just got a canvas and I painted this crazy, it was really sort of eclectic, sort of tree and very make-believe. And I showed it to my husband and he said, oh, that's not a real tree. There's no dimension. And that's not art. He might argue that he didn't say this, but that's how it felt to me at the time. And I said, no, I'm going to put it online and I'm going to get a sale. And he's like, oh, I don't know about that. So anyway, I put it online and I got a sale. I remember waltzing into the lounge room, like I'd only painted a tree, and I said, I am now a professional artist. I have sold everyone laughed at me, oh, it doesn't mean make you a professional artist. But if you're saying that it does, then I'm going with that definition. That works.
It's worked for me so far.
So back to your style and how you discovered it.
Back to style. That's actually a question I get asked a lot is how do you find your style? And again, similar to the inspiration motivation thing, I think it's something that we have backwards, and we think we have to develop and sort of find our style in order to get deeper into our creative practice and in order to be able to sell our work. And again, the style is not something that you discover and then you make art. The style is something that comes as the result of making lots and lots and lots of art. And it's basically just, in my opinion, style is just like a collection of all the bits in your process that you've discovered over time that work for you and that you repeat and that you reuse and that over time develop into something that people will call your style and that become recognizable to you because it's like a unique combination of ways that you use color, the tools that you use, the subject matter you portray, the way that you work with light and shadow, the way you stylize anatomy or shapes in general. And again, I think it's this sort of backwards idea that you find the style and then you make the art, but it's like you make the art and over time that develops your style. And again, your style is not something that you arrive at and you're finished. It's something that will keep evolving for as long as you're making art, because you're always going to be making, hopefully, you're always going to be making new discoveries, you're going to be trying new things, you're going to be experimenting with new colors, new tools, and you're going to find that some of those things work really well for you, and you're going to be like, well, I'm going to put this in my toolkit and I'm going to keep using it. I mean, that's a subconscious process in many cases, but it's like that is an element that you will keep reusing. And other things, you try them and maybe it's like, nah, okay, that didn't work, or it doesn't fit with my style. Or I say it doesn't fit with my, it doesn't work for me, so I'm not gonna pursue that further. And I used to be really hung up on this as well, because I felt like, oh, but I don't really have a style, and you always have a style. In the beginning, it's not as recognizable because it's just too random, and the things that you're trying are just so scattered that it just hasn't had a chance to come together in any sensible way. But the more you make, and again, I think like making art almost every day is one of the best ways to speed up this development. Now I've lost thread, but yeah, it's just the showing up regularly and just trying lots and lots of things will help you develop your style. Not the other way around. So
Such a good answer. Such a good answer. That's so true. I guess thinking back to my tree paintings, for example, the fact that they were kind of flat was part and really colourful.
Yeah.
And then someone said one day, "Oh no, it's not. It wouldn't be one of your trees if it didn't have glitter." Like, don't with the glitter, you know, like. As you say, it's just those choices that you make that you don't even notice are turning up time and time again. That's so intriguing. I'd love to go back now and look at the stuff I've done and be like, do I have a style? Is there a style in the... Yeah, it's probably just hiding there and you haven't even noticed it. That's so good.
There's an artist I follow, I think she's called Corina Nika. And she goes by the name, I think, Kokorina, and she posts these really beautiful sort of, I don't know what you'd call it, like sort of tarot style, sort of dark backgrounds, gold lines, sort of relatively monochrome, sort of gold, white, beige sort of paintings, and they're all sort of very, very symbolic, like they are all a lot of symbolism in them. And they're very, very, very beautiful. And she posted something a while ago where I think it was like a sort of fairy type lady with the sort of one leg sort of hanging over into the water, and it was had all sort of little swirls and butterflies and plants and things around her. And then a few days later she was like, I just found this picture from when I was a child, and it's basically like the same picture. and so many of the elements that she was using now, I don't know, she's probably like in her mid-30s or late 30s. So many of those elements were already there, like when she was, I don't know, 8 or whatever it was. And that's what I mean. It's like those are just choices that she made and things that she discovered and that appealed to her as a child, and they still appeal to her now, or they've sort of come back around, and that's the thing. You always have some element of your style. There's always something in your art that is unique to you, that is or is an unique combination of items to you. And I just thought that was really fascinating for me, because I was like, yeah, basically all the stuff is already there.
yeah. So he's like, even if
it's just gotten so much better.
Exactly. It's funny, even on my children, because I write children's books, on my front covers, which I haven't created, other artists have, and I remember putting some up, you know, for votes at times on Facebook or whatever, and I often got the comment like, no, you can't go with that one. That's really pale. And your books and your covers are really bright and really bright. And I was like, yeah, but I didn't draw that. And they're like, no, it doesn't matter that you didn't draw it. It's not your style. And I thought, isn't that like, it's so interesting that even the illustration on a book, they sensed it wasn't my style, even though I didn't actually draw it. That's so intriguing to me.
There's something in your personality or the way that you write that has a spark that is not washed out and pale,
not
but needs a bit more.
Very in your face. Let's talk about creativity as a habit. Yeah, and then I want you, as you're answering that, to lead into that you've got a wonderful free resource for people, which is like the Jumpstart Guide to planning your own creative challenge, because doing a creative challenge is what helped you develop that daily habit. So how important is it, and why are you so dedicated to helping others also create that daily habit?
For me, having creativity really as a daily habit has been like completely life-changing, like literally life-changing, and it's completely changed my creative life. And there's I mean, so much of what we've already talked about is a part of why I think that's so important. It helps you develop a more consistent style. It helps you overcome your inner critic because you just learn to deal with the ups and downs, or you learn to recognize like the ups and downs are natural, that they don't mean anything necessarily in most cases, that it's just like maybe other things are taking your energy right now or taking your brain power right now, and that's okay. It doesn't mean your creativity is broken or gone. And the fact that you're creating every day, it comes with, it automates a lot of it. So what I was saying earlier on, like you're not giving your inner critic a chance to get started up, it's because you're sitting down to draw basically before your inner critic can get started, because it's so automatic at some stage. And in the beginning, when you start, you do have to come into it with a little bit of like willpower to get through the initial stage. But willpower is like an inexhaustible resource. So if you have to make loads and loads of decisions, that saps your willpower and it leaves you less energy to do other things. And so willpower in the long run is just not a reliable way of keeping going in your creative practice. And if it's not a habit, you have to bring that willpower up every single time that you sit down to draw. And it's a massive effort. And just that initial, I like to call it like a startup cost. You just have this startup cost of energy that you have to put in every time. If you're drawing infrequently, you have this massive expense of energy that you have to put in just to make yourself show up. And if you make it a habit, that almost completely falls away. I mean, maybe not entirely, and it does depend a little bit on how you're feeling from day to day. But there's so much less energy investment there because you're just in the habit of doing it, and your brain just sort of clicks into that mode of, okay, it's time to draw now, whether I want to or not. Let's sit down, let's get going. It's sort of all the cogs sort of start turning. It's like, okay, start thinking about what I'm actually going to make. So you avoid a lot of that major startup cost, which you can then use instead. You can use that willpower to keep going through the harder parts of a piece. So there's a lot of energy saving, I feel, that goes on when you automate your creative practice into a habit. And you build momentum over time. Again, this goes back to sort of motivation, inspiration. The more you make, the easier it is to come up with ideas because you're used to being in that creative mode, and you might start thinking more about what am I going to draw later as you're going through your everyday. You just get into the habit of being more in that creative space more of the time by default. And again, that saves you a lot of energy. And the more you make and the more you see actual results from your practice, the more motivated and the more inspired you get. So again, it's like that's giving you like a boost of like, okay, I'm ready to show up again tomorrow because I know that this works and I see that it's working. And when I look back, again as well, if because then you can like easier compare your progress. If you're like drawing every single day and you look back and you're going like, this is what my drawings were like a month ago, and I feel like I've already made big leaps a month later just from showing up every day. So that's like, say, 30 drawings. If you drew really infrequently, like if you drew once a week before, it would take you 30 weeks just to even remotely get to that point. And it would you probably wouldn't even be at that point because the learning compounds when you do it more regularly, and it's much easier to connect stuff together because you've only just used it and you're like, okay, I can try that again tomorrow, and then I'll try a variation of that the next day. Whereas if there's weeks in between you drawing, it's more sort of haphazard and more random, and it's more disjointed and disconnected. So you're going to make a lot more progress in like the same amount of hours if you're drawing regularly than if you're drawing infrequently, but you overall put in the same amount of time.
Yeah, I read that somewhere. I read that your brain like learns better if you did a little bit every day rather than like did a whole lot on one day. And I thought, whoa, like how's that for the importance of a daily practice? How it's so funny. The brain grows and learns better a little bit every day rather than even if you do the same amount of hours on one day.
Yeah.
That's mind-blowing. Mind-blowing.
And I think as well, there's like this energy cost. If you're going to decide, okay, I'm going to draw, and then you sit down and you do 5 hours of drawing and you haven't drawn for weeks, like the next day you might be sore, it will have been hard work. Again, your inner critic's going to be like, oh, that wasn't good, like that hurt, and like things hurt now, and that was really hard, and that was really annoying, and we shouldn't do that again too soon. And then you might not do it again for like 3 months because the experience wasn't a pleasant one. And if you're out of practice, then you have all the sort of insecurities that come up of like, well, this isn't really good and I'm really rusty. Whereas if you're drawing every day, that you and you're doing a little bit, it's a lot less scary, it's a lot less threatening. So maybe your inner critic is going to be a bit like, well, that wasn't so bad, so maybe we can do it again tomorrow. It wasn't that awful. And you can be like, okay, well, I can be uncomfortable for like 10 minutes, and if it's absolutely awful, I don't have to carry on after that. But then you might get excited about it, and then you do carry on because you want to. But then it's less scary the next day to show up again because it wasn't like a huge investment of energy and resources just to get through one act of creativity. It's like a little bit and then a little bit again, and over time it builds motivation and it builds skill, and you see the results over time.
And the power of doing
you don't have a chance to get rusty in between.
True. And the power of doing it in a challenge is that, for example, I must confess now, I've only been doing Lisa's challenge for 5 days. Am I allowed to say that? That's 5 days still. And
still 5 days. It all counts.
It's 5 days. And because I was a bit ad hoc before that. But what I found was like that I went, but I don't want to draw a fish today. Like I don't want to draw a fish today. She said I have to draw a fish today. So anyway, then I go and I'm like, just try drawing a fish today. I mean, it's just a fish. It's okay. Just draw a fish. So, next thing I know, I'm drawing a fish and I'm like, oh my goodness, like drawing a fish is the best fun. Who knew that fish would be so fun? And this is what I'm finding, with the challenge and then doing it as a community. And it's so much fun. I'm actually finding that it's getting me past even comparisonitis because I'm going, oh my gosh, look at that person's fish. I never would have thought to draw a fish like that. And this person's fish. And oh my gosh, those colours on that fish, because we're all drawing a fish together. There's like this amazing kind of united power of drawing things you wouldn't normally draw and doing it with other people. Hence your freebie about encouraging people to either join a challenge or make their own. And do download that, guys, because it's really good. I had a good look at it today and started taking notes on it.
Oh, thank you.
So, yeah, take that opportunity from Ffion because I think you'll find that super, super valuable.
To be honest, I didn't want to draw a fish either. But that's another thing that I like about the challenge with the prompts, and is one reason that it can be good to join somebody else's challenge, which is there's two options in this guide, is like how to join a different challenge and sort of some of the initial thoughts that go into that. And the reasons why that's a good thing, and also how to design your own challenge if you've got maybe an idea of something that you would like to pursue. But I think what is great about having a challenge that comes with a list of prompts. Like you say, there's always going to be prompts where you're going to be like, I don't like that. I don't want to draw that. That sounds stupid. No, I think fish are stupid. I don't want to draw a fish. And what I have found for me personally is that usually those things that I have resistance to are either things that I just have no prior connection to, like no real like emotional connection to. It's just like, it's something I've never drawn. It's something I've never shown much interest in. Or it's actually something that I don't like. But as you say, then sometimes when I sit down to draw, I start to find things about it that I do find interesting. And I'm like, but look at all the different shapes that fish come in. Look at the colors. Like, I mean, the underwater world is incredible. So, and your initial thought might just be like the sort of stereotypical sort of fish of like that just a fish. But when you think about it, fish come in so many fantastic shapes and sizes and colors. And when you start getting into that and like the shape of the different fins and the different markings that they have, you might just sort of start to become fascinated by it. And this actually happened to me last year with bugs. One of the prompts was, I think, a butterfly, and Lisa had posted a tutorial about how to work with a symmetry tool, and I was like, yeah, I mean, I like butterflies, but I have like, I don't know, it's just not something I draw very often, and it's not something that I didn't really fancy drawing it, and I was like, oh, I don't know. And then I drew it with a symmetry tool, and I had so much fun. And then I was looking for reference on Pinterest, and I just went down this complete rabbit hole of all the different bugs that exist. And I was like, these are like alien life forms. They're like fantastic, and they're all so shiny, and they have these incredible colors, and there's really bizarre shapes. And I just did a whole series just of bugs because I got so into it. And again, that's just something you don't know beforehand. And when you start exploring it, it's often when you have that resistance, it's because it's something that you're like, I don't know, that doesn't really resonate with me. But it's often just because it's something that's unfamiliar, or just something you haven't thought about much, or something that you actively dislike. But when you do start exploring it from an artist's perspective, you might find there's actually stuff about it that you really love and that make it actually fascinating to you. And that's just a really great way of actually pushing you to draw subject matters that you wouldn't normally draw. And the more you try, the more you discover stuff that you enjoy. And again, that brings you back to your style and the stuff that you like, the subject matter that you portray. And it just gives you such a much more wider range of images to draw from. And like Lisa's had all sorts of series where it's like, okay, now we're going to draw different kinds of trees, now we're going to draw different kinds of plants, and I was like, I don't want to draw plants. But then you draw like different shaped plants, and then like maybe 3 months later I'm like drawing a different picture, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to put this plant in the background. And it's just, if I hadn't had to draw that plant, that sort of visual reference wouldn't have been in my head, and I wouldn't have thought to put it in my background. So it's, over time, all these little bits and bobs, they come together into a greater whole, and all of a sudden, like, you have all this stuff to draw from in your imagination, where you're like, oh, I can put all this fascinating stuff in the background. Like, I know how to draw a house now, and I know different kinds of trees, so I'm going to fill the garden with like different kinds of trees, and I'm going to put a plant on the windowsill because I drew a plant last week. So
that confidence really starts to. That's my dog scratching in the background. He's having a little. I think he's announcing that we're over time, and so that was a perfect timing. Thank you, doggy. But I've had the best time ever talking to you. And we
This
could
has been
talk for
amazing.
days and days. And if only we could catch up for coffee or something, or tea. But you're in Germany and I'm in Australia. But nonetheless, we have had the best time. And I'm sure all our listeners have learned so much from you. So I can't thank you enough for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and letting me nerd out about creativity. It's been fantastic.
Amazing.
I've really enjoyed myself. I would love to do that again.
Absolutely. And may your days continue on, like up until, you come back on the show and you're at day 1,698 of continuing your creative journey. Now, in the show notes, you'll be able to find all the links to Ffion, her Instagram, her blog, and her website, and her goodie that she's giving out for free. So thank you again so much, Ffion, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Eleanor. It's been so fun. It's been absolutely fantastic.
Did you find that interview valuable? Great! Now be an awesome human and go and leave a review, because it helps the podcast out so much. Want to read the show notes? Check out the children'sbookauthorpodcast.com. Want to find out more about me, Eleanor Page? Find me at eleanorpage.com, or come and say hello on social at Eleanor Page Books. Until next time, keep writing and keep learning.